The envelope was heavy in Claire's hands, the kind of paper that still remembers how it was made. I heard the pause before she opened it, a small, held breath that my bones somehow felt before she spoke. The seal broke with a soft, obedient sound. Some stories don't just tell pain, they reveal the truth. This is one of them, voice of aunt. It looked ordinary until she unfolded it. Creamy paper, rough edges, the smell of lawyer offices and old afternoons. The words scrolled across in tidy black.
Instructions, conditions, a signature I practiced once until my hand stopped quivering. Claire's mouth moved. I didn't need the sound. There was proof there on the page, solid and patient, more honest than their voices had been for months. Nobody had come to my grave for a long time. That was the quiet first. A calendar with blank squares, a chair pushed under a table, flowers that wilted without an audience. I would catch myself listening at the window, pretending the silence was like winter, necessary, natural. It wasn't. It felt like a forgetting that had weight. I remember the last autumn afternoons, how the house kept small noises in its pockets. The kettle would sigh, and nobody asked why it was still on. My phone rang once and kept ringing until it left a little tired hole in the air. Claire said, "I'll be there next weekend. Promise." She meant the words the way people mean receipts, useful, but fleeting. Love had become a casual verb, easy to say and easy to misplace. They called me stubborn sometimes. I liked that. Stubborn keeps a person standing. I signed the paper with a careful impatience. The pen left small ridges in the paper. Ridges that would later matter more than their promises. I made a choice nobody saw as anything but unusual. I folded memory into ink. If memory had to be proved, let it be proved by feet and weather and weeks of small attendance, not by sudden sobs on a stone. Claire sat at the kitchen table reading the condition aloud to herself, the words soft and unsure. 4 weeks at the grave. She traced the lines with a finger, like checking for a pulse. She wanted what? Her voice floated, thin as a ribbon. Her brother, Ethan, said nothing. He was always good at moving through rooms without landing. They moved differently now, like people who had learned to fold themselves into other people's schedules. They arrived when it suited them. I kept a list in my head, a small list, a household ledger of what had been said and what had been kept. I am not a woman who made these things out of spite. I do not like sharp edges. I did it because I had watched absence collect like dust and wanted one clean thing to cut through it. Proof is not cruelty. Sometimes it is the only gentle way left to insist you mattered. I thought of the times Claire left without saying goodbye properly, the way Ethan's eyes would skim my hands for numbers. I remembered the sentence they hadn't meant for me to hear. Once she's gone, we'll have to sell this old thing. It lodged like a pebble behind my teeth. When I tell this, I still feel the quiet space of that afternoon. A cup cooling beside a newspaper, a sun patch on the rug. It was ordinary and precise, and the exact place where I decided to test memory. I called Mr. Hale, who has the steady voice of someone who handles other people's lives for a living. He listened, clearing his throat like he was picking up stray coins. "You're certain?" he asked. He said it the way people say "weather," like it was an inconvenience for both of us. I said yes, and folded the paper into the envelope, and for a long time I felt very calm. After that, days went on like a series of small, honest gestures. I watered the plants, even though the porch was empty. I fed the cat, though he favored the radiator more than my lap. I left the music low at night, because sounds make company where people do not. I kept thinking of the word remember, how it meant something different when someone else said it. It can be a warm hand, or it can be a ledger. When I died, and I say it plainly because it happened as plainly as a lamp going out, the house held its breath. There was no drama. A cup half full at the sink. A sweater folded on a chair. The kind of endings that look like beginnings in someone else's life. Oh, now we have an old house to sort. Oh, now there are papers to sign. Someone put flowers on the porch because that is what people do when they need a note to remind them of being kind. The funeral was small in attendance and large in speech. There were words that tried to line up like proper candles and failed to look steady. Chairs sat like quiet witnesses. I remember counting them as though they were numbers in a score, hoping one more would arrive to make it feel like music. They did not. Not enough of them. The back row held coats and polite distance. There was the usual politeness of relatives, a clumsy kindness that smells faintly of obligation. It fits in the mouth in the same way money fits in the pocket. Useful, not necessarily warm. Claire stood by the mantel that day, hands tucked in hers, the envelope already folded in her purse from the day the lawyer had handed it to her. She did not cry loudly. She folded herself smaller, the way people do when they are carrying grief that is not quite all their own. I felt irony like a small bird in my chest. The only time they came was when paper asked them to. I do not like to close with bitterness. I like to close with what is true. Money remembers what hearts forget. The grave waited like an honest thing, patient and without judgment. The chairs remained slightly empty. And I learned that the proof of being loved sometimes comes in footsteps. The rest, understanding, repair, begins after the proof has been read. The house didn't change right away. That's the strange mercy of wood and walls. They keep pretending you're still inside. For days, maybe weeks, it held its breath. Curtains still half drawn, cup still on the table, the same tiny stain on the rug that Claire once promised to clean. Dust began to gather in corners like small, polite guests who didn't want to intrude. I used to dust every Sunday morning. Habit, not vanity. There was comfort in the way light landed on polished wood. After I was gone, the light still came, but it looked tired, like it had run out of things to touch. On the mantel, a family photo stood in a frame that had begun to fade. I'm there in the middle, hair set just so, Claire at 12 with frosting on her cheek, Ethan half smiling because he'd been told to. I always loved that picture because it was real. They were still mine then, before schedules, before the excuses. I used to whisper to that photo when the house felt too quiet, and in a way, I still do. The mail came as usual. A kind neighbour collected it and stacked it by the door. Envelopes with cheerful logos, Christmas cards I had sent out before the hospital. Some of them came back unopened. There's a kind of cold that paper holds when it travels both ways and finds no one waiting. Mr. Hale visited once. He kept his coat on, even inside. "I'll see to the legal matters," he said to the empty air. "They'll reach out soon." He didn't realize how strange the word soon sounds when no one is listening. I remember how I started writing small notes those last months. Not the dramatic kind, just names, dates, who called, who didn't. Little check marks beside nothing. It wasn't bitterness. It was bookkeeping. Love, in my life, had always lived on ledgers. Who was fed, who was clothed, who remembered birthdays. When the calls stopped, the ledger stayed. One of those afternoons, Claire and Ethan had come by. Not for long. I had made tea, even though I knew they wouldn't finish it. Claire sat by the window, phone face up beside her saucer. "Work's been mad," she said. "I'll stay longer next time." She didn't look up when she said it. Ethan walked through rooms like a realtor, not a nephew. "This place must be freezing in winter," he muttered, tapping the old radiator. I smiled, the kind of smile that keeps your dignity folded inside. They didn't notice the notebook on the table, open to a clean page. I wrote as they spoke. Tiny words. A list of how many minutes they stayed. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. People show you their weight by how long they sit still in your silence. That evening, after they left, the house exhaled. I could almost feel it settling around me, the way tired bones settle into warm sheets. I walked through each room slowly. There's a rhythm to goodbyes that only the walls understand. First the air cools, then the light dims, then the sound fades until even your own footsteps seem borrowed. I stopped in the hallway, looking at the coat stand. Their scarves still hung there from winters past, little lies of warmth that never returned. I touched one, soft, perfumed faintly of something expensive, and thought, this is what presence feels like when it's gone. That night, I wrote my letter to Mr. Hale, the same calm tone I used for recipes and grocery lists. I told him to adjust the will. I told him I'd changed my mind about the property and the money. He called the next morning, his voice uncertain. "You sure you want to do that?" I said. "It's only fair they earn what they forgot." He paused. "Earn?" "They promised to visit. Let's make sure they mean it." He tried to sound professional. "You want to add a condition?" "Yes, visits. 4 of them. 4 weeks. Together or alone, doesn't matter. They just have to show up." He sighed softly, the kind of sigh that comes when decency meets something it doesn't know how to name. "You're kind," he said. "You could have cut them out completely." "I'm not punishing anyone," I told him, "just giving them a way to remember me properly." I could hear the scratch of his pen. Paper again. Always paper between us and the truth. That afternoon, I went out and bought myself roses, the same kind Claire used to bring me years ago, before she started forgetting the shade I liked. The florist wrapped them carefully, smiled without questions. I carried them home like company, set them in a vase beside the photo. For days, they stood proud, white petals catching afternoon light like memory catching breath. When they began to droop, I didn't replace them. I wanted to see how long beauty waited before giving up. I kept thinking of something Claire once said when she was younger. "You'll live forever in this house." She had said it while running her fingers through the dust on the window ledge, laughing. I wanted to believe her then. But forever, I learned, is only a word until someone forgets to visit. When I close my eyes, even now, I can still see that room. Sunlight, roses leaning toward their own shadows, the faint hum of the refrigerator. The house waited long after I stopped breathing, and in its stillness, it kept my memory intact. Waiting is a kind of love too, if you let it be. The roses outlived their promise. The day I rewrote the will, the sky looked ordinary. Soft grey, no drama. I'd waited for that kind of day. Bright days lie. They make you hopeful for no reason. Grey days tell the truth. I sat at the old oak desk in the study, the one with a small drawer that always stuck halfway, no matter how you pulled it. On top, the papers lay flat, waiting. Mr. Hale's neat typing already filled most of the page. I just needed to sign and seal what the heart had already decided. I read it slowly. The words felt clinical, almost polite. Numbers, clauses, conditions. There was a strange peace in reading your own ending spelled out in legal ink. The pen moved across the paper like it remembered the road. My hand trembled a little, but I let it. The shaking felt honest. Every loop of my name carried years of dinners cooked, birthdays waited for, calls missed. The pen didn't just sign, it gathered. When I came to the line about inheritance, I stopped. That's where the condition belonged. I'd thought about it for weeks. The idea had come one quiet night, while the rain tapped on the window. Soft, rhythmic, almost patient. I remember thinking, if they can sit through a few weeks of rain, they can sit with my memory. So I wrote, "Inheritance shall be released only after 4 consecutive weekly visits to the grave, confirmed by Mr. Hale." Simple words, but they held weight. Not punishment, not vengeance, proof. 4 weeks meant time, time enough to test whether guilt could turn to love again. Mr. Hale's eyes lingered on the line when I handed it back. "You're sure, Mrs. Alden?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. They might see this as unconventional. "Families misunderstand love more often than strangers," I said. He smiled, the kind of smile people give when they don't agree, but respect you for saying it anyway. "You've thought this through." "I've had a lifetime too," I told him. He folded the will, slid it into a thick cream envelope, and pressed his seal into the wax. The imprint was neat, permanent. I watched the wax cool and thought, so that's what final looks like. That night, the house hummed the same way it always did. Nothing looked different. The cat circled the rug, uninterested in my moral experiments, but inside me something unclenched. I had made peace with my small rebellion. Days blurred after that. The doctor came and went with his careful silences. I wrote fewer notes, spoke less. Some evenings I'd sit by the window, tracing the edges of the sky with my eyes, and wonder if Claire ever looked up from her phone long enough to see the same clouds. When the end came, it didn't come like thunder. It was softer than that. The body deciding it had said enough. The last thing I remember is the cup of tea cooling beside me and the light slipping off the walls. And then, stillness. I don't know how long it was before Mr. Hale delivered the envelope. I only remember his tone when he read it aloud to them. The words sounded different in someone else's mouth, less personal, more like history being told by a stranger. Claire's eyes widened at the condition. Ethan laughed, a quick, nervous sound. "She's serious?" he asked. "She was always serious about what mattered," Mr. Hale said quietly. Claire ran her thumb over the edge of the paper, tracing the letters like they might change under her touch. 4 weeks, she whispered. That's cruel." "It's not cruelty," Mr. Hale replied. "It's closure." They didn't answer, just looked at each other, the way siblings do when guilt and pride collide and neither wants to blink first. That night, Claire stood at the front porch, staring at the house. Lights off, curtains still drawn. She whispered something to herself. Maybe my name, maybe not. I like to think it was something kind. The next morning, she bought flowers, roses again, white ones. I smiled in the quiet way you smile when irony has a good sense of timing. She hadn't brought flowers in years, and now she would bring them 4 times. Ethan tagged along the first visit. He parked close to the gate. Engine still running. Claire stepped out carefully, shoes sinking a little into the soft soil. Her voice was barely sound when she said, "Hi, Aunt. We're here." Mr. Hale noted the visit, professional as ever. His pen clicked, his ledger folded. I wondered if he felt strange recording love as attendance. By the second week, they brought candles, the kind that melt too fast. Ethan stayed in the car that time, scrolling through something glowing blue. Claire stayed longer, brushing leaves from the headstone. She whispered again, longer this time. I didn't need to hear the words. I felt them, the way grief travels not in what is said, but what is done. And still, I waited, not for apology, for sincerity. By the 3rd week, the soil had started to firm up where they stood. Even the ground remembers repetition. Mr. Hale told me once, before all this, that death makes people sentimental, not faithful. I'd said, then let's give them enough time to tell the difference. He had smiled, shook his head, and replied, "You might just prove me wrong." Sometimes I think that's all I ever wanted, to prove that love, even late, still counts. And maybe it was working. Would you forgive them if this happened to you? The first week, they came together, not because they wanted to, because they didn't know what else to do. Grief has a way of making people obedient for a while. Claire's hands were trembling when she placed the flowers down. The bouquet looked too new for that kind of silence. Crisp cellophane, white ribbon, no smell of soil on her fingers. Ethan stood a few steps back, phone in hand, eyes flicking between the grave and the parking lot. I could almost hear his thoughts. How long does one stay before it counts as love? The ground was damp from last night's rain. It soaked through the soles of her shoes, left faint dark circles. She didn't notice. She kept looking at the stone, lips pressed tight, like the words she wanted to say would sound wrong if she let them out. Mr. Hale stood a little away, hat in hand. The clipboard looked out of place against the marble and mud. He didn't speak, only nodded when Claire whispered that she'd see him next week. I thought of her childhood. The same hands, now cold and careful, were once small and warm, tugging at my sleeve for cookies, for attention, for approval. Funny how the body remembers gestures, even when the heart forgets names. The second week, the sky brightened, and guilt started to fade into routine. They came again. This time, Ethan stayed in the car entirely. Engine running, window down just enough for the breeze. Claire brought lilies instead of roses. She'd read somewhere that lilies meant peace. I wanted to tell her peace doesn't come in flowers, but in time. She brushed away the old petals herself. Her fingers lingered on the edge of the stone, tracing the carved letters. "You always said I'd be late to my own wedding," she whispered, almost laughing. "I guess I was late here too." The sound was thin, but it reached, somewhere between apology and memory. Mr. Hale made his note. He didn't interrupt her. That's what I liked about him. He understood silence as language. By the third week, the visits changed. Claire came alone. No brother, no car idling in the distance. Just her, a thermos of coffee, and the quiet stubbornness of someone who wanted to do this right. It rained again. She didn't bring an umbrella, sat on the little bench nearby, letting the drops run down her sleeve. There was no performance now, no checklists. She just stayed, looked around the cemetery like she was seeing it for the first time. How the grass tilts one way when the wind sighs. How the sparrows land near the stones without fear. She reached into her coat pocket and took out something small, a folded photograph, her graduation picture. I remembered that day. I'd worn the wrong color and stood too close in the photo. She used to tease me for that. Now she set that same picture against the headstone, tucking it under a stone so it wouldn't fly away. "Do you remember how you said I looked like I'd swallowed the sun?" she murmured. "You were always exaggerating." I wanted to answer her, tell her no, I wasn't. That day, she had. When she left, the wind lifted the corner of the photo slightly, and for a second it looked like it might smile back. Mr. Hale's report that week was shorter. He just wrote, "Claire Alden, present, alone." The fourth week came quiet, heavy with the kind of stillness that feels like understanding. The air had turned colder, even the birds seemed slower. She arrived with no flowers, no pictures, no coffee, just herself. She sat down cross-legged on the ground, palms resting on her knees, the kind of posture people take when they've stopped pretending. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You were right. We always say we'll visit later. There's always later, until there isn't." Her voice cracked once, just once. Then she smiled, a tired, real smile that doesn't need witnesses. From where I watched, I could see the faint sheen of rain on her hair, the small tremor of her shoulders. It was not sadness now. It was reconciliation, the quiet kind. Mr. Hale didn't need to record that part. He looked at her for a moment and said, "You've done what she asked." Claire looked up at him. She knew it'd be me, didn't she? He hesitated, then nodded. She knew. Claire exhaled slowly, eyes drifting back to the stone. Ethan won't come again, she said softly. She expected that too. There was no anger in her tone, just understanding. Sometimes love dies quietly, but understanding can still bloom from its ashes. Before leaving, she placed a small white envelope at the base of the grave. No name on it, just my initials. I never told anyone what was inside, because some things are meant to stay between the living and the remembered. That night, I could feel the air around the grave warm slightly, like gratitude had form. The visits were over, the condition fulfilled, the inheritance ready. But that wasn't the real inheritance. Not the house, not the money, not the furniture that would soon change hands. It was this, the 4 weeks that brought my name back into her mouth, gently, truthfully. Later, when Mr. Hale filed his papers, he added one more line to the record, almost like a prayer. Condition met with sincerity. That was all I'd ever wanted written. Funny how people remember when papers arrive. But sometimes remembering becomes the inheritance itself. The house felt different when Claire came back. It wasn't the creak in the floors or the smell of old polish. Those things had always been there. It was the air. Softer. Like someone had finally opened a window that had been stuck for years. She carried a box of cleaning supplies, a small speaker, and the same quiet look people wear when they're stepping into memory barefoot. Outside, the wind pushed against the curtains, but she left the door open anyway. I liked that. The house hadn't been allowed to breathe in a long time. Mr. Hale had already handed her the papers that morning. It's all settled, he'd said. She left you the property. Claire had nodded, not with excitement, but something closer to apology. And Ethan? He received his portion last week. She didn't ask how much. That's how you know a person's heart has changed, when the numbers stop mattering. She moved through the house slowly, touching the corners with her eyes. The kitchen first, kettle, cups, the old jar of sugar still half full. Then the living room, where the clock still hung a little crooked. She reached out, fixed it, and smiled faintly. You were right. Still ticking. On the mantel sat the sealed letter I'd left her, small and square, tucked beneath the clock's shadow. Her name written in my handwriting. The loops uneven, ink slightly faded. She saw it immediately but didn't rush. She walked through the rest of the house first, like someone walking through an unfinished sentence. Upstairs, the air was still heavy with lavender sachets I used to hide in drawers. She opened one, found a folded handkerchief with embroidered initials, a few old photos, and a key tied with ribbon. The key belonged to the desk downstairs. When she turned it, the drawer that always stuck gave way with one easy click. Inside, a small wooden box wrapped in soft fabric. She hesitated before unwrapping it, almost reverent, as if she already knew it wasn't just things she'd find inside. The first thing she lifted out was a photograph. Her at 6 years old, holding a birthday balloon, frosting on her chin. Behind her, my hand rested on her shoulder. The photo edges were worn smooth from years of being touched. Beneath it, a crayon drawing. A lopsided house, a sun too big for the paper, and 3 stick figures labelled Aunt May, Claire, and E. In the corner, a 4th smaller heart with home written inside it. She stared at it for a long time, thumb tracing the word like it was braille. At the bottom of the box was a folded envelope. My handwriting again. Her name. She opened it slowly. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, it means the house is still standing. And so, perhaps, is the love that built it. I know you'll think this was a test. It wasn't. It was a reminder. We live fast now. We forget the weight of visits, the holiness of showing up. I needed you to remember that love is proof, not theory. The visits weren't for me. They were for you. So you'd find your way back home, to where things are real and unmeasured. I never blamed you for being busy. The world keeps people busy to make them forget what matters. But memory is the only thing stronger than time. Promise me you'll keep one thing alive here. Not the furniture, not the flowers, but the warmth. That's the only inheritance I meant to leave. Love without presence is memory without proof. You gave it proof. Thank you. Aunt May. She pressed the paper to her lips. Eyes closed, shoulders trembling. A few tears fell, small, clean ones, the kind that don't announce themselves, the kind that mean understanding, not sorrow. She sat there for a long while, reading and rereading the letter, until the ink blurred under the wet of her thumb. Outside, a few dry leaves scratched at the window pane. The house seemed to breathe again. When she finally stood, she didn't look smaller. She looked steady, like a person who'd found footing after years of walking in circles. Downstairs, she lit the fireplace. The crackle broke the silence gently. She placed the box on the mantel beside the sealed will, side by side, life and lesson together. Then she began to clean, humming softly. The same tune I used to hum when I was washing dishes. Mr. Hale dropped by in the evening to check the locks. He found her there. Sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, ash on her cheek. "You're really staying?" he asked. Claire nodded. She bought this place with her first teaching paycheck. You don't sell that kind of story. He smiled. She'd be glad. I think she already knows, she said quietly, glancing at the mantel. When he left, the house felt lighter. Claire walked from room to room again, no longer as a visitor, but as someone reclaiming space. Every sound was familiar now. The floors didn't creak, they greeted. The dust didn't bother her. It belonged. Before sleeping, she took out the letter once more, placed it beside her on the nightstand, whispered something. I couldn't catch it all, but it sounded like a promise. Maybe forgiveness, maybe gratitude, maybe both. She slept with the window open, letting the night breeze in. The curtains swayed lightly, like a slow dance. Somewhere downstairs, the clock ticked into a softer rhythm, no longer lonely. I watched her, and for the first time in years, in death, in silence, I felt at rest, because remembrance had finally come home. Some goodbyes wait for the right silence. Morning sunlight spilled through the old curtains, soft and golden. The house looked awake again, not new, just breathing. Dust didn't settle anymore. It shimmered. Claire sat at the kitchen table, coffee in a chipped mug I'd once refused to throw away. Her fingers traced the rim like it was something holy. The letter lay beside her, folded neatly, read too many times to stay crisp. I could almost hear her thinking, so this is what she wanted. Mr. Hale stopped by that morning with the last of the estate documents. You're free to do whatever you wish now, he said, handing her the file. Claire smiled faintly. Freedom's a strange word, she murmured. Sometimes it sounds like loneliness. He looked at her with the patience of someone who'd heard grief take many shapes. Your aunt gave you both, freedom and memory. Most people only leave one. She nodded, eyes glancing toward the mantel where the will was now framed. The wax seal had dulled with age, but the mark still looked proud. The frame was simple wood, just enough to keep it upright. Above it, she'd placed the photo of the three of us, me, Claire, and Ethan, from that long-ago birthday. She'd cleaned the house, but she hadn't changed it. That's what I noticed most. My chair stayed by the window. My books stayed stacked by the lamp. She'd only dusted them, as if asking permission to keep them open. Every Sunday, she started a small ritual. Tea for one, but she'd pour 2 cups. One sat opposite her, untouched, steam curling quietly upward. For you, she'd say, with a small smile that didn't need an answer. Neighbours began to notice her again. A few dropped by. Mrs. Turner from across the lane, the one who used to borrow sugar and never return it. She'd peer in, shake her head softly. It's good to see someone here again. This house always looked lonely. Claire would smile. It's not lonely, it's remembering. There's a kind of grace in how remembrance fills silence. The walls began to sound different, less hollow, more alive. Even the cat, long gone, seemed to leave echoes in the corners where he used to sleep. Ethan sold his share quickly. The lawyer handled it. He didn't come to say goodbye or to see the place one last time. I wasn't surprised. He had always measured love in convenience. But when the sale papers were signed, I saw Claire's hand tremble slightly. Not out of anger, but sadness for how easily people walk away from what once fed them. Still, she didn't say his name again. Some names, once released, need to stay gone. Instead, she began small restorations. Painted the porch white again, repaired the banister, planted roses by the front gate, the same kind I used to buy for myself. I wondered if she realized the circle she was completing. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't need to. One evening, she found the old guest book I'd kept near the piano. It was filled with birthdays, dinner notes, small scribbles from visitors long gone. On the last page, in my uneven hand, I'd written, "If you are reading this, it means the house has not forgotten me." She smiled at that, took a pen, added beneath it, "It never will." That was the night she started the teas. Every Sunday, just before dusk, she'd set the kettle to boil, open the windows, and let the scent of fresh mint and lemon fill the rooms. Sometimes neighbours joined her. Sometimes she sat alone, eyes closed, listening to the faint hum of the world continuing. Mr. Hale stopped by once more, less as a lawyer, more as an old friend. He stood by the mantel, looking at the framed will. "You left her something special," he said quietly. I smiled in the silence of his words, though he didn't hear. Claire turned from the stove. "She left me the truth. That's more than money ever bought." He chuckled. "Truth doesn't sell well in my profession." "Maybe not," she said, "but it stays longer." That night, after he left, Claire sat by the window, letter in hand again. She read the same lines she'd memorized by now. "Love without presence is memory without proof." She whispered them aloud, once, then again, slower, like a prayer, or maybe a vow. Outside, wind brushed through the roses, scattering a few petals onto the soil. She followed them with her eyes, then smiled softly. "I'll keep them blooming," she said, "every year." I felt something loosen inside me then, the kind of peace that doesn't come with forgiveness, only understanding. Weeks passed like quiet music. The house began to host laughter again, small, occasional, but real. Children from the neighborhood started coming by on Sundays, invited for cookies and stories. Claire would sit them down in the parlor and read from the old books I used to keep by my chair. Her voice carried warmth, not sorrow. She'd start each story the same way. "This belonged to my aunt. She believed stories remember people better than pictures do." And I'd listen from the still air, proud. Once, a child asked her, "Where is she now?" Claire smiled. "Everywhere I keep her." That answer, simple, unpolished, was the truest thing I'd ever heard. By late summer, the roses bloomed thick and wild, the kind that don't ask for care but give it anyway. The grave had a new bench beside it, painted white. Sometimes Claire sat there for hours, not talking, not crying, just being. The lawyer's record closed that season. All accounts settled, all papers done. But I knew. The real account was still open, the one written between breaths and visits and small gestures of grace. I often think of that letter on the mantel, how it became more than paper. It lived like a quiet guest in the house, teaching the air how to stay gentle. Now, when the light hits it just right, you can almost see the wax seal shimmer, as if it remembers being warm once. I stayed silent, but the truth found its voice. Stories like this never fade. Voice of Aunt.